welcome to the Dr. Tim Jennings Show. I'm Dr. Tim Jennings, and on this show we seek real answers to life's problems. I'm here with Sue Collenberg and Lori Atkins.
Welcome. Today our topic is on happiness, what it is and how to get it. But first we have a question from Arnaldo. What I don't understand is the killing commandment by Moses at Mount Sinai. If God directed Moses, isn't this the opposite of what a loving being would have done? Wouldn't it have been better for him to abandon them, just free them in the desert?
So this is a really interesting question, and because there's two factors on the death penalty. One is the civil society that they were living in, and then the other is dealing with people outside their society, perhaps enemies of the state and other groups of people. So we're going to first start with the within the society itself.
Okay.
This is a group of slaves that just came out of 430 years of slavery. And how do you think life was valued amongst that group of slaves? How were they treated by the Egyptians? Were they treated with equality and respect?
No.
Did they have human rights? No. The value of human life was very, very cheap. And so people ask, why such stiff penalties for collecting wood on Sabbath? You'd be stoned, and
or
child
sassing your parents.
child sasses your parents, you're stoned. Exactly. Why such stiff penalties? And a few years back in Iraq, there was a story. Iraq Today, after the United States helped get rid of Saddam Hussein and so forth, they had an NPR reporter reported on a story where a grocer and 3 of his employees were shot, killed, and the store was firebombed. And why did that happen? Because a local religious leader put out a fatwa or an edict that you are not to display in your grocery store tomatoes next to celery stalks. And evidently the reason for that was that some person could misunderstand a male genitalia, evidently. But this particular grocer had celery stalks next to tomatoes, and so he was shot along with his employees, and the store was firebombed. Now, let's say you're the governor of Baghdad, the U.S. governor in the green zones governing Baghdad where this has happened. And you have put out a rule or a law that there's no drunk driving. Now, in your mind, your understanding, your good judgment, which is more serious, drunk driving or setting up tomatoes next to celery stalks?
Drunk driving.
Drunk driving.
If in that society where they believe that a death penalty is warranted for setting celery stalks and tomatoes next to each other, what penalty will you have to give drunk driving? If you give drunk driving a $500 fine and suspense of a license, will they think drunk driving is as bad as the celery stalks?
No.
So if in their mind they think this is worthy of death, what's the minimum penalty you can give drunk driving?
Death.
Death penalty.
Right.
This is why you see so many death penalties prescribed at this time in history, is because they've just come out of slavery and they think death penalties are warranted for the most minuscule things. Okay. And so if God wants them to understand these are serious concerns, then he gives the death penalty. It's not because he wanted it, it's because of the primitiveness of their understanding and the only way to get them to take things seriously. Okay, that's within the internal system of the way they ran their government with the Israelites. Why the death to the neighbors, go and kill everyone, man, woman, and child, and so forth?
And animals.
Yes.
Even animals.
Okay, first off, it wasn't God's design. His first design, if you read the scriptures in its entirety, was that he would send the hornet before them and the pestilence before them, and little by little the other people would abandon the land, and Israel would slowly take it over, and there would be no war at all.
Okay.
But Israel, former slaves, having been dominated, abused, now feel, hey, we've got a God on our side who's powerful God, who just overthrew the 10 major gods of Egypt, walked through on dry ground, destroyed the Pharaoh's army. We have a God on our side. We can now, do you think they wanted to be gentle and passive? No, this is the human nature. They wanted to go out and they wanted to dominate and control and be in control. So they insisted on going to war. Well, so God says, okay, fine. God's now looking through the corridors of time. He wants the least amount of people to suffer in war. He wants the least amount of people to be killed in war. He wants the least amount of people to be displaced by war. He wants the least amount of people to be traumatized as post-traumatic stress disorder victims by war. And so what's the way to get the least amount of people, actual raw numbers, the whole way, killed and everything? Then if you're going to go to war, wipe them all out, get it over with. In one generation, we will have, throughout history, the least numbers of people dying and the least numbers of people traumatized by war. But they didn't do that right either. And so we've had 4,000 years of ongoing and off back and forth wars in the Middle East because they didn't even carry that instruction out. So again, it wasn't God's design for them to do this. It was meeting them where they were in the hardness of their hearts, okay? And then one final element as to why maybe God has acted sometimes to put people into the grave at times in Old Testament times is if you believe the worldview of the Bible that God, after Adam and Eve sinned, the human race would be eternally lost except for Jesus coming to redeem the human race. If you believe that construct, then without Jesus coming, there is no human being that will be alive in the end. They will all die. So God in Genesis 3 tells the serpent that the Messiah is coming to crush his head, to overrule him, to overturn him, and to redeem humanity. Well, the devil got busy trying to obstruct it. And how could he obstruct it? By getting every human being to harden their heart against God. God would not force a woman against her will to be the mother of Jesus, nor would he have her, Jesus' mother, be a very corrupt Baal worshiper, for instance. And so at one time in human history, the Bible says there was only one righteous man left on the entire world. Only one. In the entire planet, one person still has a heart that is working with God. All the rest are permanently closed. And then the flood comes. Now, some will say, well, God was punishing sin. I don't see it that way at all. I see God waiting to the last possible moment to intervene therapeutically to keep open the avenue for the Messiah, because if the Messiah doesn't come, all human beings are lost. So this was an act of mercy and grace, and you will see this in pretty much every time you see God acting directly. It's keep open avenue for Messiah, because the situation is getting so out of control. If he doesn't act, everyone will be lost. So I hope that answers our question.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So let's talk about happiness. What is happiness?
Well, my understanding of happiness is an internal state of well-being, a state of peace and joy and contentment. It's a state of being at peace with oneself and content in a state of well-being.
And this is like a constant quest for lots of folks. Everybody's trying to find happiness, or what do you want most in life? People say we want to be happy.
Yes, and one of the problems is you can't find or obtain happiness by pursuing happiness. And the reason for that is happiness is a byproduct. Okay, byproducts cannot be obtained directly. They come from something else. So sawdust is a byproduct of woodworking.
Okay.
You can't go out into nature and just find sawdust.
Right.
Okay, it's a byproduct of something else. Happiness is a byproduct. It cannot be achieved directly. What's it a byproduct of? Happiness is a byproduct of healthiness in all domains.
Okay.
When you're physically unwell, you've got the flu, nausea, vomiting, are you happy?
Not at all.
When you're relationally unwell, you've got major conflicts with parents or spouse or kids, arguments, divorce going on. Are you happy?
No.
Psychologically unwell, inside your head, I'm ugly, I'm stupid, I can't do anything right, everybody hates me. Are you happy?
No.
Spiritually unwell, you're under guilt and shame, under condemnation, feeling that you're going to burn in hell and so forth. Are you happy?
No.
Happiness is a byproduct of healthiness in all domains. And while people cannot directly pursue happiness, they can pursue healthiness.
And so how much control do we have over the happiness and the pursuit of that?
Yes, so the only element that you have 100% control over, if we're talking 100%, you see how much control. You have a lot of influence over your happiness, but not 100%. There's only, of the four domains, you have 100% control over your spiritual healthiness.
Okay.
100% is your spiritual healthiness. You have major influence over the rest of it, but not 100%. For instance, people can have physical illnesses and diseases that they did not choose. They could have been born with genetic problems.
Yes.
They could have had an exposure of a toxin, an infection. Things can happen that undermine our physical health that we didn't directly do anything to contribute to.
Right.
Okay. However, we can make unhealthy lifestyle choices that do undermine our physical health.
sure.
Yes.
So while we don't have 100% control over the physical health aspect, we have control over the decisions we make in regard to our health, which will reduce the likelihood of health problems and move us toward happiness.
Yes.
Okay?
Okay.
We don't have 100% control over the psychological piece, because the psychological piece is set up in childhood.
Right.
And just as you and I didn't have any control over the language that we speak, We had no choice in that. Did somebody consult with you? Would you like to be an English speaker or somebody else? No consultation happened. You and that language is uploaded after birth. It's not genetically pre-programmed.
Yes.
Okay. Well, language isn't the only thing that we upload into our minds in childhood without ever questioning. And so people will upload a whole belief systems, they'll upload psychological processing, the way they understand, internal views of themselves. And so we don't have 100% control over our psychological well-being. But as we become adults, we do have 100% control over whether we address our psychologicals.
Okay.
Notice what I said,
That's
whether we
different.
address them or not address them. That's up to us.
Okay.
But even addressing them, still things can still happen that can undermine our psychological well-being. We can be lied to, we can be tricked, we can be assaulted, we can go to war, we can be drafted and sent into combat, and that can affect our psychological well-being. Okay, lots of things can happen. We could be one of the first responders at 911 and see awful, horrible things that can affect our psychological well-being.
Well, and the physical can be mixed with that too. I mean, we can have defects in our brain and things like that affect our psychological domain.
That's exactly
How healthy
right.
it can be.
That's exactly right. So, and then relationally, we can have 100%, and I believe, governance over how we conduct ourselves in a relationship.
Right.
So that we can conduct ourselves with maturity and with healthy actions and motives and so forth. But we cannot have 100% control on how the relationship itself turns out.
Right.
We can choose to extricate ourselves from toxic relationships, which will move us towards health, but we may have to go through periods of grief and loss.
Yes.
Okay?
Right.
So, but where we have 100% control, we have 100% control of our spiritual well-being.
Okay.
It's up to us who we worship. It's up to us how we worship. It's up to us whether we resolve patterns of behavior that are self-centered and exploitive and some might call evil, or whether we justify those patterns of behavior and persist in those patterns of behavior. So the views of God we hold directly impact our neurobiology, our sense of well-being, our physical and mental health, whether we're actually experiencing peace and happiness or anxiety, fear, and stress. And so we have control over that, but we can be influenced.
So if you don't realize it's a byproduct and you just go around seeking to find happiness directly, what are some of the problems associated with that?
Well, the biggest problem with that were people who are happiness seekers.
Yes.
They actually substitute pleasure seeking for happiness.
Okay.
See, while we can't get happiness by directly seeking it, it's, again, byproduct of healthiness. You can seek pleasure directly. You can go out and there's different avenues of this. Some people seek pleasure through recurrent dysfunctional relationships. They seek happiness by getting someone to admire them, to love them, to have intimacies with them. And in the newness of that relationship, there's pleasure and excitement, and yet there's not real happiness. Those always crash and burn. Some people seek happiness through thrill seeking, and they go through thrill seeking experiences, daredevils, skydiving, hang gliding. No, I'm not suggesting all skydivers or hang gliders or thrill seekers are doing that. I'm just saying some people can do that.
Right.
Okay. Alcohol, drugs, various addictions, gambling, seeking pleasure. Some seek happiness by seeking achievements. Now, achievements can bring a certain legitimate sense of well-being if it's a legitimate achievement. But if it is primarily in the pursuit of happiness, then what happens is these end up being workaholics who are working for the promotion or working for the next, big thing. And no matter what they get, they're never really happy because they're trying to get something that cannot be provided by the avenue they're going down. And so they will often exhaust themselves and burn themselves out. But let me say again, if you're actually, not pursuing happiness, you're pursuing healthiness, unless you're developing your own abilities. So you go to college and you get an education and you've worked hard and you graduate, then you will experience a level of achievement and happiness from the achievement because you're not actually pursuing happiness that way. You're pursuing healthiness of personal development. And then at that achievement, there is a normal sense of happiness from having achieved something you work hard on. But if you actually were only pursuing the happiness through that way, then you actually wouldn't experience it as much. You'd feel dissatisfied because there would be a moment of it, but then you're still feeling a sense of
never
inadequacy.
enough.
It's
That's
never
right.
enough.
You
Never
got to be
enough to
on to
fill
the
you up.
next.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us some of the obstacles or the things that set themselves up to obstruct happiness.
I think the framework, the belief systems that people hold if we believe that, we should be happy. Okay? And then, well, I have a right to be happy. Okay? The actual Constitution doesn't say that. It says the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
But many people, again, have a distorted belief system, and they get this idea that I have the right to happiness itself. No, you have the right to pursue happiness. And I think our framers were quite insightful to realize that happiness, again, is not something that you have this, but it can be achieved through pursuing healthiness. So false and distorted beliefs. And then the beliefs about self. A lot of people have this sort of beliefs like this. Rather than I deserve happiness, I don't deserve happiness.
Right.
I have some individuals who had very traumatic childhoods.
Right.
The trauma in childhood warped their developing sense of self. They have an internal image in their mind that is not an accurate image. And they feel on some gut level that there's something fundamentally wrong with them.
Right.
I am not, on some gut level, they have this innate sense, I am not as good as other people. I am uglier than other people. I am broken. I am not as deserving. And so this really deeply embedded, distorted belief system prevents them from ever being happy. I remember another lady who came to see me, long history of depression and anxiety problems. And she had been to multiple psychiatrists, been put on multiple medications, but still didn't find any real sense of well-being, happiness. And she told me the story. When I asked her, do you believe in God? She actually got angry and flared at me and said, don't you ask me about God. And then she went on to tell me how angry she was at the God she doesn't believe in. And so she went to tell me this story, that at age 7, her mother was killed in an automobile accident. And she had vivid memories of being at the funeral, sitting on the front row next to her dad, when the preacher looked at her and said, Jesus took your mommy to be with him.
Yikes.
Yeah.
And she had this idea, and she looked at me with anger. I said, but I needed my mommy with me.
Right.
Of course.
And she had this idea put in her mind that, and goes to the belief question. She had this belief now that God and Jesus are the type of beings who take mommies from children.
Okay.
This is now what she believes. So from that moment forward, she could never enjoy it. She lived under this sense of terrible dread. If anything bad or unfortunate happened, which happens in life, she immediately went into the belief system of there's God punishing me, bringing more, messing with me again. If anything good happened in her life, though, she couldn't enjoy it because she had this belief. I may have this today, but it's just I had my mom for 7 years, but it's just a matter of time before God takes this from me.
Right. Wow.
She never found any sense of peace or well-being or happiness because she had this belief in an oppressive God who was the one who took mommy from her.
Yes.
Okay? That false belief cheated her completely out of actually achieving healthiness within herself. Obviously she still had grief issues and stuff to work on because she never really got over it.
Right.
Okay?
Well, of
but
course.
so how do we help people? We help identify, okay, what are the beliefs they hold? Are any of these beliefs unhealthy, flawed, distorted in some way? And many people who struggle to find happiness have some real internal belief systems that are just wrong.
Right. I mean, you wrote an entire book called The God-Shaped Brain. It's interesting that these false beliefs or beliefs in any kind can be that damaging, can have that much of an impact on someone's self or literally someone's brain and physiology.
Yes, so in the God-Shaped Brain, we focus on their view of actual God they hold. And if you worship or believe in an authoritarian God, a dictator God, a God who punishes like this person believed in, you actually live in a state of regulated or overactive stress circuitry, fear circuitry in your brain. You never can really fully relax. You're constantly hypervigilant. You're hypervigilant to your behavior. Did I do this wrong? Did I say that right? Is this person? And then some people become very, very concerned with what other people think of them. They become hypervigilant to, what did I say that right? Did I offend this person? I don't want to sin against that person. And they become hypervigilant, constantly living in fear that they might have said or done something wrong, rather than simply stepping back and say, wait a minute. I can't be responsible for what other people think.
And when you're going through that, it sounds like I hear a lot of that in religious systems. And people, as they're practicing their religion, I think that's the biggest thing that gets believers is, not doing things right.
And how many? And I guess I would say, and what's the standard of right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the measuring stick you're using to measure? And almost always it's behavioral.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And thus people are conditioned to live in fear of doing bad behavior. And what I help people realize is it's not primarily behavioral.
Right.
It's motivational. You can do you have the love and goodwill in your heart to seek to be a benefit to other people, even if the specific behavior ultimately causes harm. Doctor in the emergency room who gives a medicine with the intent to help, and there is no evidence, no records around, and the person has an allergy to it, and it ultimately causes harm. They still acted right and righteously, even though it in the end didn't turn out well. It's not ultimately the behavior itself that matters. It's the intention and motive of the heart that matters. But what happens with this false belief system is they get focused on their behavior, and then they they try to find peace and happiness
Yes.
through the way they dress.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
They want to check off some boxes.
Right.
Okay. So other things that people find that undermine their sense of happiness is relationships.
Yes.
Relationships that are dysfunctional, relationships in which they're being criticized. It could be relationships with their church, it could be relationship with their spiritual leader,
Or their employment.
or their employment
Yes.
relationship. Okay, so relationships need to be looked at, and a lot of people really struggle in the job setting. One of the things I see people that have their happiness undermined is when they have a boss that's critical of them and telling them they're not doing a good enough job, and they will come in to see me overwhelmed, and they may have a job where their job is in customer service answering emails, or in telephones answering the telephones, or something like this. And let's say they're doing the email job, and they might have an inbox with 3,000 emails in it that they've got to answer, or something like this, and they feel completely overwhelmed and stressed. And I have to step back and say, wait a minute, you're looking in the wrong place. You're looking in the inbox. You're supposed to be looking in the outbox. Okay, and what I mean by that is each one of us are finite beings. We have limited capacity.
Yes.
I can only actually do therapy or assess one patient at a time. A person on a telephone can really only be answering, responding one call at a time.
Right.
You can really only be answering one email at a time.
Yes.
Okay? And so we have limited ability. And so what you have to do is you have to make some first internal, objective assessment about your efficiency, about your capacity, about your ability, about what's reasonable productivity. How many emails is it reasonable to answer in an hour?
Yeah.
Right.
How many phone calls is it reasonable to answer in an hour, and so forth and so on? And then look at that and answer, is my, I can do 300 emails an hour. I don't know how many, I'm just making something up, okay? But if that's the
a
reasonable
lot.
number, yeah, of course. I can do 100 emails an hour, okay? 100 emails an hour I can answer. Okay, if that's a reasonable. In fact, when I look at the other people doing the same job, I'm doing 100 and most people are doing 90. I'm doing about 10 more than most people. But at the end of the day, I always have 200 more in my inbox than I started with.
Right.
Okay? Then what do? You don't look at your inbox and feel like you're drowning. Your inbox is job security. Boy,
right.
I'm so glad I've got all those
I'm
inbox.
happy.
Yes, and I'm very pleased. And you have to actually refocus and look on the outbox and say, I'm doing a good job. Even if
So
your boss
true.
is critical on you, you say, hey, you know what? He can have that opinion.
Yeah.
But I'm doing 10% more than anybody else in this
reality
organization.
is telling me
and
that
that's
I'm doing a
reality.
good
And somebody
job.
at peace,
Right.
and he's only getting pressure from his boss to
Right.
try to get more out of us, so that they don't have to hire another person because they don't want to pay that salary. But I'll just continue to do my
Be
job well
secure.
and be at
Yes.
peace with myself. And
Right.
and if you don't do that, if you let their perspective become your perspective, you don't think for yourself,
Right.
then you can have your happiness undermined.
So talk about maybe some other steps that people, if they're not happy, could move toward happiness. Talk about maybe specifically in the physical realm.
So
because-
the first thing that people have to do if they're not happy, the first thing is just step back and look at the domains. Look at your physical health,
Okay.
look at your psychological health, look at your relational health, look at your spiritual health, and ask, are there any places that I can see instantly I'm not healthy?
Right.
And that I actually have an option to do something about. Somebody may be, for instance, physically unwell, but they have some disease and it's already under care, and there's nothing more they can do there. Okay, so that may not, but if there's some action you can take to improve it, then you want to begin implementing and moving into healthiness.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time on the Dr. Tim Jennings Show.
you.